Hi everyone, so today we are going to be reading Genesis 19 to find God's intended meaning of Genesis 19 and learn how we can apply Genesis 19 to our lives. Now before we get started reading Genesis 19, I wanted to give a little context on Genesis 18. So in Genesis 18, God told Abraham that he was going to judge and destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because they were living in sin and they were living wickedly and they were hurting people and themselves and God because they were sinning. And the reason God told Abraham this plan is because God wanted Abraham to intervene. He wanted to ask God to show Sodom and Gomorrah mercy, which God ultimately wanted to show them mercy, but if they don't turn from their sins, then sin has to be judged. And we saw in Genesis 18 that God gave Sodom and Gomorrah time to repent. And because God told Abraham what he plans to do, Abraham does intervene. Because remember, Sodom is important because Abraham's nephew Lot lives there. He doesn't want to see Lot get destroyed. And he also intervenes on behalf of all of Sodom and Gomorrah. He doesn't want to see anyone get judged and destroyed. And him and Abraham agreed that if there was as little as 10 righteous people who lived for God and followed after him and believed in him, that God would show Sodom and Gomorrah mercy. So Genesis 18 ended with God leaving Abraham, and God's two angels went to Sodom to see if they were living wickedly. So now that we know the context of Genesis 18, let's get started and read Genesis 19. We are going to start off by reading verses 1 to 3. The two angels came to Sodom at evening. Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Lot saw them and rose up to meet them. He bowed himself with his face to the earth, and he said, "See now, my lords, please come into your servant's house. Stay all night, wash your feet, and you can rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, but we will stay in the street all night." He urged them greatly, and they came in with him and entered into his house. He made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So yes, these were the two angels that were with Jesus in Genesis 18. And we see that Lot sees them coming from the gate in Sodom. Lot must have been of someone of importance because it was at the gate where people met together and discussed important matters and discussed official business. So we see that Lot invited the angels to come stay with him. And after some prodding, they eventually agreed. We see that Lot was very insistent that the angels come stay at his house. And that is because Lot knew how wicked the city was. He knew that someone could try to mess with these angels. And he knew it was safest for them to stay with him. So he was very insistent. He said, "Come stay with me." Now, we don't know if Lot knew that they were angels or if they were men. But either way, he said, "You're safest with me. Just come with me." He didn't say you're safest with me. But he said, "Stay with me." He insisted because he wanted them to be safe. He knew they would be safe with him. We are now going to read verses 4 to 5. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. They called out to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came in to you this night? Bring them out to us that we may have sex with them." So we can see from this passage why Sodom is so wicked. They are demanding Lot. He said, "Bring out those men who are staying with you so we can rape them." We can see why God is going to punish them. He can't let this sin go unpunished if they're going to keep on hurting people. If this was a courtroom and there was a rapist on trial, we would want them to have consequences to their actions. We would want them to go to jail. And notice how this passage says both old and young people came to Lot's house demanding Lot to give them these men so they can rape them. This shows that all of Sodom is corrupted. All of Sodom is chasing after sin. They're living wickedly and they're not following after God. Not part of Sodom's corrupted. All of Sodom is living for sin. And most of all, we see that they haven't turned from sin. God was trying to give them time to turn from their sin and live for God. But we see because of their actions, Sodom has not turned from their wicked ways. They have not turned from their sin. They are continuing to pursue sin instead of God. We are now going to read verses 6 to 8. Lot went out to them through the door and shut the door after himself. He said, "Please, my brothers, don't act so wickedly. See now, I have 2 virgin daughters. Please, let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them what seems good to you. Only don't do anything to these men, because they have come under the shadow of my roof." Now, for those of you who don't know this chapter, I'm going to give a spoiler because that's important for this section. So, God does end up destroying Sodom and Gomorrah because they didn't turn from their sins to continue to live wickedly. But God saves Lot because he's the only righteous person in Sodom. He's the only one striving to live for God. Now, listen. Lot just offered up his daughters as rape victims in order to protect these visitors. if Lot is the only righteous person in Sodom, that's a problem. That just shows you how wicked Sodom truly is. While Lot is considered righteous and considered right with God because he believes in God and he's striving to live for God, Lot's still a sinner. What he did was a sin here. God would have never condoned his actions to give up his daughters as rape victims. God would have never wanted that. We are now going to read verses 9 through 11. They said, "Stand back." Then they said, "This one fellow came in to live as a foreigner, and he appoints himself a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." They pressed hard on the man Lot and came near to break the door. But the men reached out their hand and brought Lot into the house to them and shut the door. They struck the men who were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. So we see the men don't want what Lot has to offer, and now they're just even angrier because they're like, who are you to tell us what to do? Who are you to not even live here your whole life, who came as a foreigner trying to tell us what to do? So now they're even more mad, and now they're like, I'm going to do worse to you now that you tried to stop me. So now what they're trying to do is they're trying to break down the door so they can hurt Lot even worse. So as I said before, God would never want Lot's daughters becoming rape victims. So what do the angels do? They intervene on God's behalf. They grab Lot, they bring him in the house, they protect his daughters like Lot could not, and they blind these men so the men could not come into the house. They blinded them so they couldn't find the house and hurt them. So now after all this went down, Lot definitely knows that these are not typical standard men. Lot was these two women's father. He had a role to protect these two girls, yet he didn't. He offered both of them up as rape victims to protect these visitors, and that's where God comes in. God would never want his creation to become rape victims. So he sent his angels. These angels acted on his behalf to protect Lot's two daughters from becoming rape victims because he never would want that to happen to any of his people. He protected them, unlike Lot. We are now going to read verses 12 to 13. The men said to Lot, "Do you have anybody else here? Son-in-laws, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we will destroy this place, because of the outcry against them has grown so great before the Lord, that the Lord has sent us to destroy it." The angels said to Lot, they said, "Get whatever family you have and go, because God sent us to destroy this place because it's living wickedly and because they're chasing after sin." So it is clear that God could not find the 10 righteous people to spare Sodom and Gomorrah like he promised Abraham. And Lot would know by now that these are angels because they're talking about coming from God to destroy this place. We are now going to read verses 14 to 16. Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters, and said, "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be joking. When the morning came, the angels hurried Lot, saying, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the iniquity of the city." But he lingered, and the men grabbed his hand, his wife's hand, and his 2 daughters' hands, the Lord being merciful to him, and they took him out and set him outside of the city. So Lot listened to the angels. He went and found the boys who were going to marry his daughters and said, "Hey, we got to go. God's going to destroy this place because it's living for sin and not God." But the boys didn't take him seriously. They thought Lot was joking. So they didn't listen to Lot and they would not leave. They chose to stay in Sodom. Then we see the angels come back to Lot. They're like, "Dude, you got to go. You got to take your wife, you got to take your daughters, and you got to go before you get destroyed." But we see that Lot hesitates. He hesitates to obey the angels. He doesn't jump to obey God. He hesitates. He hesitates to leave his home. He hesitates to leave his life behind because this is the life he built. Even though he knows it's about to be destroyed, he hesitates. But we see that even though Lot hesitates, even though Lot doesn't jump to obey God, God shows him mercy. He has the angels take his hand, take his wife's hand, and takes his daughter's hands and lead them out of Sodom so they won't get destroyed. He had compassion on Lot, even though Lot didn't jump to obey him, because he loved Lot and he cared for Lot. God could have easily left Lot there to be destroyed with the rest of Sodom, but he had compassion for him, and he had the angels lead them out of Sodom so they will not get destroyed. He showed them mercy. We are now going to read verses 17 to 22. It came to pass when they had taken them out that he said, "Escape for your life. Don't look behind you and don't stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be consumed." Lot said to them, "Oh, not so, my lord. See now, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown to me in saving my life. I can't escape to the mountains, lest evil overtake me, and I die. See now, this city is near to flee to, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape there. Isn't it a little one? And my soul will live." He said to him, "Behold, I have granted your request concerning this also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you get there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. After the angels got them to escape Sodom, they said, "Go, run for your lives." They said, "Don't look back." Remember, that's important for later. They said, "Don't look back." Then they told Lot, they said, "You got to go to the mountains." And Lot said, "No, please don't let me go to the mountains. I'll die." It seemed that Lot was still having trouble trusting God. Lot still doubted God. God literally just saved this dude's life. And he said, "No, you can't send me there. I'll die." He wasn't trusting God to protect him and his family, even though God just spared them and saved them. Lot said, "Please don't make me go to the mountains." He said, "Please let me go to the small city close to here." Now, originally, that city was supposed to be destroyed with Sodom and Gomorrah. But because Lot asked, God let him go to that city. He spared that city because Lot asked if he could live there. This shows how important prayer is. When we ask, God wants to give it to us if it's according to his good will and if it is good for us. And even though Lot doubted God, God still gave him his request. He still let him go to the small city to live instead of the mountains because God's good that way and he's merciful. We are now going to read verses 23 to 26. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and on Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of the sky. He overthrew these cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew on the ground. But Lot's wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So God judged and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because they didn't turn from their sins. And remember, in Genesis 14, they experienced God. I don't know if y'all remember Genesis 14, but that was the war between 4 kings and 5 kings. And remember, a lot of people from Sodom and Gomorrah was captured, and Abraham went to get them back. And it was because God was with Abraham that Abraham was able to free the people of Sodom and Gomorrah from captivity. They had personal experience seeing God work, yet they still chose to live for sin rather than God. Remember how I said it was important that the angel said, "Don't look back"? Well, Lot's wife, she looked back and she turned into a pillar of salt, even though the angels warned her not to. And the reason she looked back is because she wanted her old life. She didn't want this new life. She wanted her old life. Even though her old life was being destroyed and she was spared, she longed for it. She wasn't fully living for God. She wasn't fully committed to following after God. She longed for the sinful world. She longed to live for sin instead of God. We are now going to read verses 27 to 29. Abraham went up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. He looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and saw that the smoke of the land went up as the smoke of a furnace. When God destroyed the cities of the plain, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the middle of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot lived. So we see that Abraham knew from the destruction that God could not find the 10 righteous people needed to spare Sodom and Gomorrah. But we also see that it was out of God's love for Abraham that he spared Lot. He spared Lot because he knew Abraham cared for Lot. This shows us that God cares about what we care about. Abraham cared about Lot being destroyed, so God spared him. This shows us that we should give God our desires. We should give God what we care about, and we should pray for what we desire and what we care about, because God ultimately wants to help us, and he wants to answer our prayers if it's according to his good will. Remember, God is a God who intervenes. He's a God who answers prayers. So pray to God, and he will make it happen if it's according to his will. We are now going to read verses 30 to 33. Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. He lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. The firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in to us in the way of all the earth. Come, let's make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve our father's family line. They made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He didn't know when she lay down, nor when she arose. So we see that Lot was scared to stay in Zoar, so he left Zoar and moved to the mountains with his daughters. The Bible doesn't specifically say why he was scared to stay in Zoar. Maybe he was afraid it would get destroyed like Sodom, but anyway, he's in the mountains now with his two daughters. For some reason, the daughters think there are no men out there to have them become pregnant, so they think the only way they can become pregnant and carry on their line is through their father. So they get him drunk, and the oldest daughter sleeps with her father so she can have a child. I know, absolutely disgusting and not something that God would want us to do. We are now going to read verses 34 to 35. It came to pass on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine again tonight. You go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our father's family line. They made their father drink wine that night also. The younger went and lay with him. He didn't know when she lay down, nor when she got up. So we see the next night they got Lot drunk again, and the younger daughter went and got with her father. Now again, this is not something God would want us to do. God doesn't want us to be like that with a close relative, and God definitely doesn't want us to be with someone without their consent. So obviously Lot's daughters living and growing up in Sodom taught them some sinful behaviors that they should not do if they were to follow after God. We are now going to read verses 36 to 38. Thus both of Lot's daughters were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the children of Ammon to this day. So both these daughters do end up becoming pregnant by their father. The oldest daughter actually gives birth to Moab, and he becomes the father of the nation of the Moabites. And the younger daughter gives birth to Ben-Ammi, when he becomes the father of the Ammonites. So both of their sons become a father of a nation. And what we will see later is that both of these nations fight the nation of Israel. So we see that Lot's descendants fights Abraham's descendants. But what's really interesting is later we will read a book called Ruth. It is about a girl named Ruth who is a Moabite. So she's a Gentile. She is not part of God's chosen people in the nation of Israel. But she ends up being the ancestor of Jesus. God uses her in her line, a Moabite, a Gentile, someone who is not part of God's chosen people, Israel, to bring in Jesus, the Savior of the world. So before I end this video, I'm going to give you 2 ways you can apply this chapter to your life. The first way you can apply this chapter to your life is be God's ambassador. Lot was not being a good ambassador when he offered up his daughters as rape victims. You know who stepped in and did God's will? The angels, because they knew God would not have wanted that to happen to Lot's daughters. If they had not stepped in, terrible things would have happened to Lot's daughters. We need to step in and do what is right to help and protect God's people. The second way you can apply this to your life is fully commit and chase after God. Turn from your sin. We cannot live for both God and sin. Jesus, he frees us from being slaves to sin, where only sin harms us in our relationships with others and God. Let Jesus free you from sin's captivity so you can fully chase and live happily with God. Thank you for watching my video on Genesis 19. Hopefully this was helpful to learn more about Genesis 19 and how you can apply Genesis 19 to your life.